All right, good morning. Welcome to our second and final call on the FRPP data dictionary. GSA has issued the guidance. We've held one call. We've gotten feedback. We've also had several people email comments and questions. What we will do after this call is take any comments or questions or clarifications and incorporate those into the data dictionary and issue a second version. I will share that via the FRPP listserv. If you're not on the listserv and you want to be added, just please send me an email with that information. Today we're going to go over the data dictionary, focusing on the changes from 2014 to 15. And answer any questions that you have going through. So please feel free to ask questions as we go through the document. To help the logistics side of things, if you are not asking a question, to minimize the background noise, please mute your phone. If you are unable to join the virtual meeting link, there are no handouts that I'm going to walk through. I'm literally going through the document. So as long as you have the 2015 data dictionary with you, you can use that as a reference as we go through the call today. I will point out page numbers as we go through so that you can follow along. With that, we're going to get started. Give me 1 second. I'll be right back with you.
That's good. Thank you.
All right, we're back with you. Starting on page 3, and I'm going to blow this up so the font size is a little easier to see, even though you can't see the entire page. What we've done on page 3 is we've provided a summary of the changes from FY14 to 15. I'll go over them high level here in much more detail as we go through the data dictionary element by element. We have added 2 new data elements. First one is reduce the footprint. This will monitor your compliance with the new reduce the footprint policy document. Freeze the footprint data element will be around for 1 more year for 2015. So we'll have a freeze the footprint data element and a reduce the footprint data element. These are self-populated based off of the criteria, and I'll go over that once we get to that page in the data dictionary. The other new data element is net proceeds. For those of you that have been with FRPP for a while, this element had appeared in the past. It's reappearing in 2015, and I'll go over the details once we get to disposition. The other changes are modifications to existing data elements, starting with real property use. We are adding categories under land, building, and structure. And those are outlined there. Starting, I believe, on page 39, and we'll go through that, there are definitions provided for each of the new categories. Status indicator, there are numerous changes for this overall data element. To be more transparent, as well as to avoid misinterpretation of some of the data element categories, labels, active is being changed to current mission need, inactive is being changed to future mission need. The codes remain the same and the definitions remain the same, but there's been a lot of confusion among our stakeholders, especially Congress and others, as to what the labels represent. So we tried to change them to align with the definitions. We have added a new category called surplus. as well as the date that the asset was declared surplus. If you report a status of cannot currently be disposed, you must identify the reason why it cannot be disposed. And those new categories or reasons why are shown below. Size related to buildings. As in the past, you report a number to represent the square feet of the asset. In addition, you must identify the unit of measure for that numerical square feet, be it usable, rentable, or gross. Latitude and longitude, it's just a definitional change to align with the accepted coordinate reference system. So that's just a definitional change. Disposition method, to reduce the percentage of disposals listed as other, we've added these 7 new categories. And we'll provide more information once we get to disposition. Disposition value is just relabeling it to actual sales price. So you're now reporting, as you had done in the past, what your sales price is, and then you report the net proceeds, and you can, again, calculate based off of those two what the disposal costs are for that action. Finally, the 27 personnel, this is listed in the data dictionary as a data element. However, it will be collected in OMB Max. We are working with OMB to develop the instructions and guidance for you. The definition for the number of employees and the number of contractors remains consistent with the definition that was in the first round of the PMA benchmarking effort. But, and I'll go into more detail about that once we get to that data element. Are there any general questions on the high-level summary of changes from 14 to 15 before we move into the in-depth discussion? All right. On page 4, the only change I want to note, I'm sorry, page 5, the certification on real property reporting to be consistent with the new reduce the footprint language. Your certification letters now must be signed off by the CFO instead of the SERPO, which you did for 2014. Those letters need to be sent to GSA by the end of the calendar year, December 31st. I'm going to move ahead to page 8, which is the start of the narrative, description of the data elements being collected and definitions provided. And I'll try and do them in groups and then provide an opportunity for questions. All right. Real property type, there is no change from the prior year. I will point out again, we have provided a overarching definition of what a building is to separate that from structure. Real property use, we have again added additional categories. Once we get to that section of the data dictionary, I'll point out the definitions for those new categories. Any questions on real property type or use? All right, freeze the footprint does not change from 2014. Criteria remains the same, and this will be the last year that there will be a freeze the footprint data element in FRPP. What we're doing with the 2015 data is we are closing out the freeze the footprint policy monitoring while at the same time setting a baseline from the new reduce the footprint policy. So we had to have a second data element called, for distinguishing purposes, reduce the footprint. So we will set a baseline for CFO Act agencies on their building inventory where there are offices and warehouse assets that are located in the United States, D.C., or one of the U.S. territories that is owned and leased. If it meets all four criteria, it will receive a tag self-populated of yes. If it does not meet any of the four criteria, it will receive a tag of no for the building inventory. That tag will remain throughout the life cycle of that asset during the monitoring period of 2015 to 2020. So it'll either be yes or no throughout the 2015 to 2020 reporting, provided you don't dispose of the asset.
So once it's tagged, this is really days. Once it's tagged, then we need to make sure that we tag our assets correctly during this cycle.
Correct. So instead, this is your chance, and we went through this and even went back and provided agencies when we were doing the freeze the footprint baseline a chance to reconcile.
Okay.
But yes, you need to pay very, very special attention to your office and warehouse inventory to make sure that it is being identified correctly. Because once the baseline is set and reconciled in 2015, the baseline will not change. And trust me, I had an agency even last year, roughly 2 years from the freeze the footprint, ask us to go back and change the baseline for freeze the footprint, and the answer was no. So we're providing you this advance warning. Please do everything you can to make sure that what is being shown as your freeze the footprint baseline accurately represents, based off of the criteria, your baseline. For at least what you report to FRPP, you'll work with PBS on your occupancy agreements and reconciling any issues there. But I'm focusing on what you directly report to FRPP.
Chris, this is Susan.
Yes.
Those last three paragraphs for freeze the footprint, if you just change the FTF to RTF, will you be adding those to reduce the footprint? Because those three paragraphs pretty much describe what you just said, but they're not part of the RTF definition.
We will add those last three paragraphs, which are on the top of page 9. So the paragraph, in addition, assets which were monitored. But the issue being that we're setting the baseline, Susan.
Right, but I just want to make sure that what you just said about once Y, always Y, once no, always no, gets included in the reduced footprint discussion.
We'll take a look. Some of that, and again, I'm trying to do a quick scan. Some of it pertains to the subsequent year and dealing with the whole space reclassification, and that won't come into play until the 2016 reporting, because when you set the baseline, space reclassification is a non-factor.
Right, right, but the always Y and always N would be nice.
Okay, we're taking note of that, and we can add that to the reduce the footprint section.
Right, because we're trying to mimic your system and our system.
Sure. Okay. Now I want to point out an example for your 2015 inventory where an asset might be monitored under one policy but not the other. So let me throw out this example that I used last week. Let's say that you had in 2012 a industrial building. So when we went through the process of setting the freeze the footprint baseline, that asset was tagged as no, because it's not an office or warehouse. Through realignment of mission, the predominant use of that asset changes from industrial to warehouse. But according to the freeze the footprint policy, once it was tagged no, it remains no and is never part of your annual freeze the footprint totals for monitoring and compliance. All right, so for 2015, that asset, again, assuming there's no further mission change, it remains warehouse. That asset will not be part of the inventory for freeze the footprint, but when we set the reduce the footprint baseline, because it is warehouse, it will be part of the reduce the footprint inventory for monitoring and compliance. So your reduce the footprint total for 2015 will not, in most cases, your FRPP data match your freeze the footprint. For examples like that.
I was wondering about that.
And we are aware of it. And we will do our best to explain that to our stakeholders, Congress, GAO, and others. All right, does anybody have any other questions on the freeze/reduce the footprint data elements? I'm getting a lot of background noise. If you don't have a question, if you could mute it, just to minimize the distraction for others. All right, hearing none, I'm going to move on to legal interest. We're on the bottom of page 9. All right, legal interest indicator does not change from prior reporting. Lease authority indicator does not change from prior reporting. So I am now on page 11, which is status. All right, again, as I said in the summary of changes, what we have done for active and inactive is to align the label with the definition in the hope that that will further enlighten some of our stakeholders as to what that label represents. There was a false impression about the label of inactive especially and what that represented, that if it's inactive, the government must not have a need for it, so, you know, let's get rid of them. And based off of the definition, which has not changed from prior years, we're trying to identify that as a future mission need, which has been identified. So when you go through your inventory and review the current status, make sure that you are identifying those correctly. The codes remain the same. We tried to minimize the impact on your developers, so we did not change the codes. So if it is active, you can leave it alone as A. You don't need to change anything. All right, any questions before I move on to some of the other changes? Okay? We have added a new category. This is surplus. Surplus is a further designation of those assets that were called excess under the GSA disposal authorities. The quick summary is that the term excess means that it is excess to the needs of a particular agency. So that designation has to happen first. You submit paperwork to GSA, that paperwork is reviewed, and it begins the disposal process for GSA. One of the first steps that GSA will take is they will screen that property with other federal agencies to see if there's a need for it by another federal agency. If there is no need, that property is declared surplus to the entire federal government. And there's a declaration or a date that that occurs in line with the process. So that surplus becomes a new category. GSA Disposal is working on a process to file a list of FRPP assets that are reported excess as identified by agencies, and further identify those assets that have been declared surplus and the date that that occurred, and we're working on a mechanism to provide that back to you. And I'm sure in the first year or two it will be done in multiple methods. And I'm currently having discussions with them. So we'll communicate that to you as the process moves forward. In addition to the new category, under the existing category of cannot currently be disposed, again, for transparency reasons, we want to identify the rationale why an asset cannot be disposed. Working with agencies, we've come up with those 7 categories that are shown towards the bottom of page 11. Any questions on surplus or cannot currently be disposed? Okay. Moving on, page 11 and 12, they will show you and list the status categories that can be provided for owned, leased, and the various otherwise managed assets. On page 12, we have added the surplus declaration date. Again, we're working on the process to provide that to you, and I will share it with you as soon as I have it finalized. Outgrant indicator remains the same. Are there any questions regarding the components for status before I move on?
Chris, Dan LeMay at the Park Service. Could you give
Yep.
more clarity on campus location under cannot currently be disposed?
Sure. Let me scroll back up to that page. I'm on the bottom of page 11. Campus location, you can look at it one of two ways, and we consider both to fall under this category. If I have maybe a research or a medical campus, and I've determined, though I still have a need for the campus as a whole, a particular building or structure may no longer meet the needs or the mission of the agency, but there may be a reason why, such as it being on this medical research type campus where I cannot dispose of it. That would be an example of campus location.
Okay.
The second example, and though we're trying to be transparent, we're not trying to be too transparent. if I have a more, we'll just call it secure facility, and it's commonly referred to as behind the secure fence line, be it a military base or other, I might not have a need for a particular building, but because of the secure nature of that overall facility, I cannot sell that particular building or structure to a private sector entity because of the security restrictions in place. We did not want to highlight that as a security reason, and we also don't enumerate it further in the definition, but if it is one of those behind the fence line security situations, we called it a campus location, which does apply. I mean, because even a military base could be considered a campus of a particular nature.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I'll have more questions offline perhaps.
Okay, that's fine. Susan, did you have a question?
I did. On surplus, where it's for otherwise managed and withdrawn land, neither one of those has a report of excess status, but surplus says that the administrator of GSA is making the determination of surplus. So it seems like there's either something missing or they should really actually apply to those two.
We'll go back and take a look at the definition of surplus and which category. I think in some of our discussions internally, while we know that the declaration of surplus applies to the GSA authorities, we also recognize that other agencies have their own independent authority, some of which may involve a similar process of screening for other agencies and an eventual declaration of surplus by that other agency. And maybe we need to include that as well in our definition of surplus to distinguish the two.
Okay.
There-
It's only a determination by GSA, but for those two, they don't have a GSA component.
Agreed. So we might add another paragraph. You know, we also recognize that other agencies, independent authorities, may involve an eventual declaration of surplus, so they can provide that as well.
Okay.
And in that case, it might fall under museum trust or withdrawn lands. But we'll go back and take another look.
Thanks.
Thanks. Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to move on. For those of you following along, I'm on page 13. Historical status remains the same, the categories and the definitions. Reporting agency and using organization remain the same on page 14 in the middle. We will work with you if you have organizational change that needs to be reflected in the agency bureau code. However, I will advise you, as opposed to having our own lookup table with this migration to the new platform, we are having to work with a common set of agency and bureau names and codes, so we have to run it through another layer or check. I would ask you to please present those to us as soon as possible so that we can facilitate it for your FY15 collection. It's, I believe, Appendix E is the lookup or the lookup tables in the data dictionary for agency and bureau codes. All right, size. Acres remains the same. It's a number. 9B, which is at the bottom of page 14. This is a change. You will continue to report the number as you had done in the past. So if it's 1 million square feet, you report 1 million for 9B. However, in addition, starting this year, you will identify the unit of measure, be it gross, rentable, or usable. One of the comments from our last conference call, in the prior dictionaries, there was reference, I think it was advising people that owned buildings should be reported in gross, and I think leased should be reported in rentable and usable. We're going to go back and take a look at that and see if that text should be repeated here. We're also going to go back and have discussions internally as well as with OMB. Should we program that if you report an owned building, the only acceptable unit of measure is gross, and if you submit a leased building, and the question is, should you only be allowed to use rentable or usable, or should you be allowed to use all three? So we're going to go back and have some discussions. If you have a real-life example, in either case, an owned building that you only have rentable or you only have usable, or vice versa, that for a leased building you only have gross, please let us know as soon as possible so we can take it into consideration as to whether we make a programmatic change or just a change to the text of the data dictionary. I will tell you that for freeze the footprint purposes, understanding that you are identifying different units of measure, the freeze/reduce is one number. Regardless of whether you identify it as gross, rentable, or usable, we will still be adding up the number to make your determination of your annual totals. Any questions on the square feet unit of measure? Okay, 9D and 9E, the only change relates to the new structure use of renewable energy system. The unit of measure is each. So you're literally just counting. Otherwise, there's no change for structure units. All right, now on the bottom of page 16, the next data element is utilization. There is no change, however, again, I do want to highlight both the utilization and status data elements pertaining to our annual requirement to produce a list of assets for the ongoing litigation with homeless interests. If you report an asset with the utilization of un- or underutilized and you have not reported a report of excess to GSA, that asset will appear on the list going to the plaintiffs. On excess, which is the other requirement from the court, excess is the sum of the various categories which I'm going to outline right now. Report of excess submitted, report of excess accepted, determination to dispose, cannot be disposed, and now surplus. Combination of those 5 status categories is the equivalency of excess. If you report that status category and you have not submitted and we cannot verify a report of excess, that record will be in the listing provided to the courts and the plaintiffs. So pay particular attention to how you report those 2 data elements and ensure that you are coordinating with your staff in your agency who compiles data for reporting to HUD for suitability screening and eventual publication in the Federal Register for review by those various homeless interest groups. Okay. Any questions before we move on?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that again, please? I did
Sure.
not pick up something on that. So
Okay.
if it is underutilized or unutilized and
Yeah.
the excess categories,
No.
that's what goes on the list? Okay.
It's not the combination of both.
Okay.
We produce two lists. One is anything reported underutilized or unutilized. That's one list.
Okay.
A second list is anything reported excess, which is the combination of those 5 status categories. It does not have to meet both, or it doesn't have to be both excess and underutilized. It could be just underutilized, or it could be just excess. It does not have to be the combination of both. Does that make sense, or does that explain the distinction?
Yes, thank you.
Sure.
Excuse me, I'd like to ask a question. How are you verifying? Is there some kind of crosswalk that you're using with HUD? Because HUD in their Title V doesn't have the unique identifier number. I mean, we've required our agencies or asked them to include that so that we can identify it for a crosswalk, but how are you all doing that?
Sure, I'll explain. The requirement from the court is not to produce the list of those that have not been submitted to HUD. Our requirement per the court order is to produce a list for which the agency has not submitted a report of excess to GSA. So what we are doing is working with our GSA disposal office. We are producing a list of every asset that has been identified as underutilized or unutilized in one list. We're providing that list to them. Separate list is being produced for them of what is the equivalency of excess. They are going through both lists and matching it up against their internal records for where they have a report of excess. If there is a report of excess, we kind of strike it from the list, and that, you know, it's not shared with the court and the plaintiffs. If we are unable to identify it in our internal records, what we have done is we've reached out to agencies, and we do this more so with those properties that have not, or those, we do it with those properties where the status is submitted as ROE submitted or accepted. Because the agency is telling us we've either submitted a report of excess or we have a letter back from GSA saying the ROE was accepted. And we're saying we cannot find it in our internal files. Can you go back and check your records? If you have that documentation, please provide it to us. And in some cases, a year ago, agencies came across instances of incorrect reporting, where it should not have been report of excess submitted, it should have been another status category. And we've kind of marked those with a notation.
Our agency submits, unless we do the report of excess, we submit the Title V directly to HUD. And that's one of our challenges of getting it in our property system of how we can record that. Is the litigation is it a GSA litigation? Is it against GSA, or is it the federal government as a whole?
It is against multiple agencies. The ones I know off the top of my head are GSA, VA, HUD, HHS. But it relates to all of the agencies that are involved in the McKinney-Vento Act process laid out in the statute. But the
So
court
whether it's a
order...
report of act, go ahead.
Go. So regardless of whether that property is subject to Title V, our court order very explicitly states, and it probably could have been worded better, but, you know, we only had so much influence in the, you know, back and forth discussion with the court. And if need be, send me an email and I will share you a copy of the court order. But it explicitly states GSA is to provide an annual list to the court of assets identified in FRPP as excess or underutilized for which a report of excess was not submitted to GSA. So I fully appreciate that if you have your own independent authority, you are not required to submit a report of, you are not required to submit a report of excess to GSA.
Are you saying that we're required to submit a report of everything we've submitted to HUD, to GSA?
No, I'm not saying that either. If you have your own independent authority, you are not required to submit anything, a list of those properties that you sent to HUD. You are not required to do that.
Okay, it's just in our best interest to track it real well.
Yeah, I would advise of that, yes. Okay. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Sure. All right, we're going to move on. Replacement value, repair needs, condition index. There are no changes. Again, you are submitting the replacement value and the repair needs. Condition index is automatically calculated by the system. There is a full understanding and acknowledgement that if your repair needs are greater than your replacement value, you will end up with a negative condition index. That's not a concern. We understand that and acknowledge it. Replacement value, again, I highlight this each and every year. It is not an appraised value or a fair market value. Government, when we were coming up with data elements, acknowledged that you are not going to do an appraised value on every asset in your inventory. But due to the government-wide need to have some approximation, we settled on replacement value. The quick example that I share with people related to the definition, which is what will it cost you to replace an asset of the same size at the same location in today's standards. If I have two buildings of the same type of the same mix of space types, and they are the exact same size and they sit across the street from each other. One was built 100 years ago, the other one was opened last week. An appraised value will come up with a different number for those two buildings. Because one was built 100 years ago, the other one was built and opened last week. But in determining the replacement value, that number should be the same. Because what you're doing is you're taking the size of the building, multiplying it times a construction cost factor, and then applying other types of overhead that may apply for seismic or geographic location. So that is the quick example that I use to distinguish a fair market or appraised value from a replacement value. We provided a link to DOD's pricing guide if you have questions about how to arrive at that construction cost factor for your inventory. Any questions on replacement value, repair needs, or condition index. All right, moving on to operating costs. The owned operating cost, 14A, remains the same. Remember, it must be an annualized cost. We understand transactions occur throughout the year, but to align those costs for benchmarking and other needs, we want it annualized. Same thing for lease annual rent to lessor and lease O&M costs. Those are annualized costs, even though you may have just entered in the lease 6 months into the year. For lease rent and lease O&M costs, some leases will identify or segregate out what the O&M costs are, or there are some instances where the government is responsible for some or all of the O&M in the building. In that case, identify those costs under 14C as lease O&M costs. There are other leases where the agency is not able to identify those costs and segregate them out. In that case, report what is the equivalency of the fully serviced rent under 14B and report 0 under lease O&M costs. So those three are the mandatory data elements under operating costs. The remaining data elements from 14D to 14N are optional. Again, this was an effort to initiate benchmarking both between agencies as well as to benchmark the government versus other industry standards or industry cost comparisons. Each of those items, from total recurring maintenance and repair to roads and groundskeeping, are considered independent of all the other. So you may only know the HVAC cost that can be allocated at the asset level and the total recurring maintenance and repair. So you report, if you know it, the total maintenance and repair and the total HVAC, and you leave elevator and plumbing null. We will not assume that in tallying these up or aggregating them or benchmarking, we're not going to apply the remainder of recurring maintenance and repair to elevator and plumbing. This is not an exhaustive list of the various building systems. We just chose the most common ones where agencies might be able to make those identifications on the cost. I will advise you that the potential does exist in future years that the reporting of this becomes mandatory. So a decision's not been made, but it could be in the future. So, you might begin to make the efforts to try and figure out how you would be able to identify that in future years. Any questions? All right, main location. The change occurs under the definition for latitude and longitude. We're applying it to the standard coordinate reference system, World Geodetic System, WGS 84. I am not a geospatial expert. We provided a link for more information. Further down, when we actually get to those data elements, there's reference to a senior agency official for geospatial information, a SAOGI. And the list of those can be found on the website link provided. For latitude and longitude, remember they must be submitted in numeric format to apply to the current standard developed by the Federal Geographic Data Committee. The range for latitude is 90 to negative 90. Range for longitude is 180 to negative 180. You may go out, though, for more preciseness out to 7 digits after the decimal place. So you can say my latitude is 34.1234567. My longitude is -111, 1234567. But you cannot go 180.1234567. So it's the difference between the acceptable range and the field length. And that's discussed in the quick guide in the back. And I'll point that out to you. All right, real property unique identifier remains the same. I just make the point. Agencies may change their management systems over time. If you do so and you go from a methodology of assigning it ABC to 1, 2, 3, we fully understand and appreciate that you will have to do that. However, you will need to add a field in your new system which crosswalks you from your internal system of assigning IDs to what the FRPP ID is. We are doing trending reporting from year to year, and we're going to increase that analysis. If you do a wholesale change of your IDs, we lose the ability to do that trending analysis. City, state, country, county, those codes remain the same. We appreciate your efforts aligning with the new GNIS standards and the GENC standard for country. Congressional district remains the same. Zip code remains the same. For those of you, I'm on basically bottom of page 20, top of page 21. Any questions on kind of what I covered? There's a lot of data elements thrown in there. All right, at this point, I appreciate your patience. We're approaching the hour mark. We are recording this, and I've been advised by the IT to break it up into hour-long segments. So give me hopefully 30 seconds a minute to stop recording the first hour so it can be saved, and then I'll start recording the second hour as a different file. So I will be right back with you.